What is going on? No horsing around, family. Zach Boyd, Stephen Burton, back at it again. And today, guys, I mean, the one and only, the lead writer for The Athletic, James Boyd, fresh off this viral video he's got going around. He just wakes up. He thinks, I'm going to go out and get some exercise. I'm going to do a little bit of hooping today. Looks over his shoulder, and I guess Anthony Richardson's right there, huh?
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. I believe it was Tuesday, just a random day. I was like, you know what? I haven't played basketball in a while. I've been kind of busy. Going to go move my body. And then I get up there and lacing up my sneakers, and I hear a little bit of commotion in the gym. And I look up, and it's Anthony Richardson. And so I walk over to him, and I said, what are you doing with us regular people? And he starts laughing. And, people were asking me, did you interview him or try to get any inside information? Or I was like, no, pretty much just said, what's up? How's your summer going? He said he had been training and this and that. Nothing to report. But, I was just happy that he's getting out and kind of enjoying himself before obviously things get crazier. One of the things I will push back on for people who are watching the video is that, some people were like, I'd rather see him on the field doing this, doing that, and throwing the ball and working on his accuracy. And like, trust me, he is working on all of those things. And I think sometimes fans, media, whoever, they are like wanting athletes to be athletes and focus on their specific sport 24/7. And it's like, no, he's 21. He's going to go into a very rigorous training camp here soon. He's been training very rigorously, but that was just sort of a breath of fresh air for him. Cool experience. No one treated him like he was a celebrity. I don't know if I blew up the spot. I don't know if I basically ruined the fun for him because of the video, but it was one of those things where I debated, do I post it? Do I share it? Everyone had their phones out anyway, but obviously I have the platform a little bit. But if anything, I think the message I kind of wanted to put out there, besides obviously him playing with us, was that he's embracing the community and he's actually getting out, and he's not just, the last time we talked to him, he was saying, I only made it to Walgreens. So I joked with him. I said, hey, you made it past Walgreens. He's like, yeah, I did. So good for him.
See, so the only question, I know you didn't press him. Did you press him on the court, though? Was there a little bit of trash talk? Like how did he? I'm curious. You said he's just one of the dudes. How much trash talk was on the court?
No, it wasn't much trash talk. Not because I didn't do it. I'm not much of a talker anyways, but this is how it went down. We were supposed to be on the same team, actually, because there's a list. When you go in there and it's busy in the afternoon, there's a list. And so people obviously recognize him. They don't recognize me. They don't even know who the heck I am at all, which is fine. Like, I don't want them to know who I am, because then you're going to get harassed and asked a bunch of Colts questions. We're trying to play basketball. But one of the guys who was on the winning team, if you win, you stay on the court. One of the guys who had won had to leave. So he leaves. And, of course, this team that was already really good, they're one of the better group of guys who's usually up there. And so they were already winning pretty easily. They're like, as soon as this guy walks off the court, they're like, hey, Anthony, you want to play? And he's like, sure. And so they stacked their team. And so he wasn't the only one on their team that was dunking. They had another team that was dunking as well. And another guy who could shoot really well. So they were a really good team. And Anthony Richardson, to his credit, he was the best player because he was the biggest and most athletic guy, but he wasn't selfish. He didn't take every shot. He didn't shoot a bunch of shots. He wasn't trying to dunk everything. A lot of his dunks were pretty safe as far as landing zone, things like that. He wasn't trying to go up on every single person. And so it was pretty funny because I was like, dang, I went from, being able to tell the story of me playing with Anthony Richardson and hopefully catching a pass or something like that to going against the guy. And so the only time we ever really matched up, besides a few defensive possessions where, fortunately for me, he passed the ball and I got the ball off a rebound, I believe, and pushed it in transition. And normally I would go in and try to shoot the layup or something like that, shoot a floater. But he was kind of coming in on an angle. And I was thinking to myself, all right, you got the video of him dunking. You could either go viral for sharing the video of him dunking, or you could go viral because you're getting dunked on or your shot is getting blocked so hard off the backboard, they're just going to laugh at you. And so I shot the three. Shout out to Steph Curry, changed basketball. The three went in. I was very proud of myself. But, it was a fun game. I played against him once or twice, I believe. Lost, I think, one or both of the games. But, again, he wasn't, out there trying to, get a 10-day from the Pacers. It was pretty much just cardio. And, occasionally you would just be reminded of how athletic he is, because his first points of the day someone just threw it up from probably about mid-court towards the rim. He just caught it, reversed it, and dunked it with ease. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I really believe had he stayed focused on basketball, he could have gone pro in that too. But he's that athletic. I think that it's safe to say if Anthony Richardson had focused on any sport, baseball, basketball, soccer, swimming, whatever, he could be really good at it because he's just that gifted of an athlete. So it was fun to see him out there. And I do think for all the people who are like, man, I don't want to get hurt. Yes, there's always that like factor of it. And I'm sure the Colts, probably weren't excited about seeing that video. However,
yeah,
I would imagine this is probably the last time he'll pick up basketball, because once he signs his contract, him and every other quarterback ever, you're just not going to play pickup basketball again until you're probably retired. And so it was fun to just see him be sort of quote unquote a kid. And I don't say that in a demeaning way. It's just he's 21. And so it wasn't all that surprising to see him there from that respect. But obviously, when things get more serious, when he signs his contract and stuff like that, I'm sure it'll be all football, not only just during the season, but the offseason as well. And maybe he'll have to tone it down a bit to where he's just playing like horse or pig or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, just a cool moment, though, man. I'm glad we had a chance just to highlight it right here at the head of the show, James. I mean, you've had a couple really unique experiences with him this offseason. A little bit of backstory, as everybody saw this new intro. This is only like the second or third time we've used this intro. And we debated on what picture we were going to take. And honestly, the picture that we were going to take at first was a picture that you took, Steven, that amazing shot that you got. And I told Steven, that's James's photo, man. I was like, I don't want to do that to him. I was like, let's do something different here. But right place, right time. You want to talk about right place, right time to be with him. It goes a lot to say for a guy who's just trying to be a regular person, in an irregular world where those lights and those cameras are going to get so much more brighter, as you alluded to just a few seconds ago. Pretty cool moment just for the community as well. Forever those people, including you, will be able to say, hey, I played basketball with this guy right here.
Yeah. So
that's a neat thing,
I've had a couple on the list now, I guess. I had a chance to play with Paris Campbell right before he went and left to go train for this upcoming season, joining the Giants. And so that was more of a private run. I just knew like a friend of a friend, and he was like, hey, group chat, let's go play at this gym. I'm like, okay. And I had no idea who was going to be there. And I get there and I'm like, oh, it's Paris Campbell. Like, how you doing? And again, it was another setting where no one's treating these guys like a celebrity. No one's asking for autographs, and we're not interviewing or interrogating these guys. It was more so just, how is your family doing? How are you doing? Things like that. And again, there's like a unwritten rule where to kind of play half speed. I'm not going to dive for a loose ball. And then jokes aside, even in the transition for the layup that I could have taken on Anthony Richardson, in my mind, I'm thinking block shot or whatever. I don't want to be jumping and landing anywhere near this guy, quite frankly. You know what I mean? And it's a cool experience, but who wants to be the beat writer who, injures the, franchise quarterback? Like, that would be a horrible way to continue our relationship. And so there was some business decisions made for embarrassment, but also protection. And then I think it's a cool experience. Sometimes this job puts you in positions where you run into some crazy, people in person, and people that you usually just see in certain settings. When I was growing up in Romeoville, there was a time where Shannon Brown, the former Lakers champion, came and played because his family is around there. And I remember seeing him dunking. This was when the Lakers were really good with Kobe and stuff. And so I was nuts. And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness. And then, they had similar experiences now where during the combine, there was a time where we went and had a basketball run at like 7 a.m, I believe, maybe even 6, with some of the like NFL personnel. And so there's like scouts and, might be a coach here or there. And I remember playing against Antoine Randall L, during the combine week. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, IU legend, like Super Bowl champ, really good player. And he's really good. He can play. Even at his age, I was like, man, this guy's fit. He can play. These guys are tall. And so you learn to embrace those moments, because you never know when you're going to get that chance again. And again, there is a lot of mutual respect there where you kind of know we're not playing, for our lives here. This isn't game 7. This is more so cardio. And like you said, Zach and Steven, it's just a cool experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you said something, and not to transition off of that, but you mentioned something, and it got me thinking more and more. And I wanted to ask you, what? So as far as the Colts right now, there's three players everyone's kind of watching right now. Who, you've got Jonathan Taylor, right, with his potential extension. You got Michael Pittman Jr. with maybe his, and then you brought it up too, and I hadn't really thought about the fact that Anthony Richardson's yet to really sign his. Is that just, I know Anthony Richardson's more of like probably a formality, but like, do you have any kind of update on any of those three? Any kind of new information?
I really don't, to be honest. I do think that with Anthony Richardson, it's kind of par for the course because, to my knowledge, I don't believe that Bryce Young has signed either or CJ Stroud. And usually, because we know like the rookie contracts are pretty much set as far as how much they can make, usually the main sticking point will probably be guaranteed money. Like how closely can you get to making it as fully guaranteed as you can? Obviously, he's not going to get a fully guaranteed deal, but you want to try to get as close as possible. Yeah. So that will probably be some of the semantics I think that they're probably discussing right now. So that's something to keep in mind. But then also on the flip side, when it comes to, I believe, what is it, Juju Brents and Blake Freeland are the other two. I'm not exactly sure, but again, I wouldn't say this is something that you should lose sleep over. As soon as camp starts and whatever, and they're out there participating and this and that, I'm sure a signing will come probably beforehand. If not, it'll come during. Not exactly sure how that works. I have to honestly look it up and research it better. But again, this isn't something where I'm like, oh my gosh, they haven't signed. What's going on? Are they, haggling over something? Like, no, they will be there. You don't draft a guy, obviously the fourth overall, another guy in the second round, another guy in the fourth round, if you don't think they're going to be part of your future, or there's going to be. And then even from their perspective, as much as you want to think highly of yourself as a young athlete, as someone who can contribute to the NFL team, none of them are proven enough to like have a holdout. You know what I mean? Like you're not proven enough to haggle or really try to, dig your heels in and say, this is what I want, this is what I demand. No, you can't demand anything because, all three of you are not, for example, the number one pick like Andrew Luck was a few years ago or Peyton Manning and others where you can kind of control your destiny a bit more. So I think Eli Manning would be like a perfect example. Like you're not in that position to do that. And so other than that, I think as soon as training camp starts, this will become like a footnote. And then when they sign, I probably won't even have much time to even write about it because I'll be writing about what I actually see during the reps we see.
I would agree with that 100%. I mean, it's kind of a formality, right? Like they always wait till the last second, and no one wants to be the first to sign, right, James?
No, especially with the quarterback.
They want to squeeze it all out of there, you know what I mean? And why wouldn't you, right? Like this is your first big deal. Why wouldn't you want to get every single dollar that you have coming to you? It's life-changing money, and it'll take care of you for many years in the future if things go right. James, I want to kind of revert over to some off-season, kind of a little bit of a prickly topic, but just curious your thoughts in general. Don't want to pin you down too heavy on this, but Isaiah Rodgers, 1-year suspension with the betting situation. Just an overview on the thoughts. Just how do you see that, A, as a fan, and B, as a person who has a job to do, and you're a journalist, and obviously you got to write about this, right? Like, so you got to give you got to give both sides of that. And how do you kind of weave that together when you're going over something that's so sensitive? Because I think he's probably a pretty good man all in all. He just made a really poor decision. That being said, the penalty was very strong as they laid it down. As we know, he's got at least a 1-year indefinite suspension and waived the same exact day. Just curious your thoughts on that, James.
Yeah, I'll start off with the waiving. It made sense to waive him and Rashad Berry because they were both going into, I believe, the final year of their contracts. And so it kind of lined up pretty well. I do think that had there been more years left on the deal, maybe you don't see that kind of move for Isaiah Rodgers. Maybe the Colts are like, okay, maybe we just sit him down for a year and kind of reevaluate from there. But this gave them basically the perfect opportunity to just cut ties with it. And obviously it's something that's a bit embarrassing and honestly frustrating if you're a franchise because you feel like you put so much into preparing to win, to follow the rules, to put the best product out there, and you have people who are not focusing on the main thing, which is being a pro athlete and going out there and playing rather than, betting on what's going to happen out there. Like, how about you just bet on the work you put in and not literally, but, just go out there and perform.
Bet on yourself, right?
Yeah. And so I think that it's unfortunate. I will say that I did talked to Isaiah Rodgers here and there throughout the season. I think that he's a good guy. I don't think he's a bad person. And I think that's just a lesson for human people in general. Sometimes we want to look at something and be like, oh, that's a terrible person. This makes sense. And it's like, no, good people do bad things sometimes. Sometimes bad people do good things. It just kind of is what it is. And so I think that he made a mistake. But what makes it tough for Isaiah Rodgers in particular is the ESPN report that said he made a prop bet, on over-under on a running back. Like that to me is probably way more problematic than if he had just bet on games and the outcome of a game. Is obviously betting, I would assume, for you to win. I think that when you make sort of an effort to skirt the rules in that way, to use some of the inside information that you've obviously gained that the public doesn't have, to then bet on specific guys on your team, given the running back situation last year. I mean, there's times where I could have bet, the over under on certain guys have probably been right because of just injuries and things like that. That's where I'm like, man, is that such a breach of trust that other teams are like, maybe we just don't want this, or maybe the league is like, we will revisit this after this season and kind of think even deeper about it. And is this a guy we want to make an example of and even extend to another year or potential lifetime ban? Now, I'm not saying they should advocate for that, but I'm not saying he's out of the woods yet. I think some people think if the indefinite suspension is like, oh, he'll be off for a year, they'll inevitably reinstate him. Like, no, it's a case-by-case thing. And with all things, the NFL isn't telling us all they know. And so it was tough. It's a tough break for both players, him and Rashad Berry. I did talk to Rashad Berry at the end of last season, which was kind of crazy because, last game of the year, walking around the locker room, just trying to kill some time. I'm like, hey, I want to talk to this guy who just got a call from a practice squad. And we talked about how every opportunity matters for guys like him who are sort of on that fringe outside of the league, looking in, kind of out guys. And, he may have, got to a point where a team is unwilling to take a chance on him because maybe the talent isn't there to warrant it. So it's a tough position to be in. And then I think as far as the rules go with Isaiah, with Rashad and others, because it's not just those two. We've seen it happen with so many guys at this point. There has to be some type of, I think from the league standpoint, I'm not making excuses for the league or even for the players, because at the end of the day, if they come in there and tell you, hey, these are the 6 rules you cannot break, or you will be facing very heavy penalties, you have to take that seriously. And if you don't, the majority of the issue should fall on you and the penalty and all those things. Like, I don't feel sorry for you in that sense because you should pay more attention. However, I'm kind of concerned with how does the NFL assess if the message is getting through, because they've told us what they do. They go in, they give us points to give these speeches, and I'm like, okay, that's great, but like, and it sounds crazy. I think I threw this idea out on Twitter. People were like, okay, they're grown men, who cares? I'm just saying, do they get a quiz at the end? Seriously, like, would that help? Just to, is it, we all have jobs where you have to go on the, do like the, what is like the harassment training and stuff like that. Like, what would you do in this situation? You got to click on the different scenarios. And sometimes there are nuanced scenarios that'll come up in those trainings. And it seems so obvious, but sometimes it isn't. And I'll take one of these quizzes and I'll get like 4 out of 5. And it's like, oh, I got to get 5 out of 5 to pass this. And I got to understand what's going on. So part of me is like, man, should they have a quiz or a test or some sort of assessment to just know that the information is not just being preached to you, but it's being retained? But at the end of the day, I think it put the Colts in a bad spot because of how young they are at cornerback in particular. However, it could be like the perfect built-in excuse to sort of play the young guys, lose maybe 1 or 2 more games because you're so young and inexperienced on the outside in particular, and you just get another top 5, pick next year, and you use that to continue to build around hopefully a quarterback that you feel better about, his progress throughout the season.
Sure.
Yeah, and I was going to piggyback kind of on that too. I'm curious, James, did you, when you got to go in, that was, you kind of explained a little bit, but I still wanted to kind of see if you could explain a little, talking to the other players after all of this, not necessarily about Isaiah Rodgers, but more of, do they feel like when it comes to this, that they understand, or do they feel like it's muddy and they don't feel educated from it?
I think that the players were pretty clear that the NFL has made it easy for you to understand. At least when we spoke to EJ Speed, Colin Granson said, hey, they're making labels out of people. EJ Speed is like, yeah, I'm just not going to bet at all. And so I think what he said is more of the route they should go. But you also wonder, is that how they really feel? Because they're in a tough position, because you don't want to say too far one way or the other, like the NFL hasn't taught us anything and they're the ones signing your checks. And then also you don't want to say they've taught us everything, because you don't want to like throw your former teammate under the bus as if it's all his fault, even though it very well could been. So I think those are like some of the things that I think about when we're asking these questions, and you're wondering, okay, is there more to this? And again, they gave us a glimpse of what the presentation is like, the 6 rules, and how you can't, you can't go into a sports book throughout the season, and you can't, have someone else bet for you and things like that. But maybe I would have more sympathy towards these guys had they been breaking someone like the rules that were more nuanced. For example, they geolocate your phone, and like they can literally track if a NFL bet is made from your house, no matter whose phone it is. Like if I go to Shaq Leonard's house, I don't know why I would be there because we're not, best friends. But if I were invited to his house, his humble abode, I placed an NFL bet, they were basically saying that the NFL would most likely reach out to verify who made the bet, whose phone was it, and things like that. And so to me, there's some gray area there, because I was like, okay, like what if your wife is betting on this, but you have separate bank accounts and you live in the same house? Is she okay to just bet on this on her own? Or are we really supposed to believe that you didn't tell her anything? But then what if you have a joint account with, like, I don't know, your brother or sister or something, they come over for the holidays and they bet on the Super Bowl, and you get, like, how do they discern who made the bet, who didn't make the bet? But then again, that isn't what we're seeing get caught up with these guys. It's always like the most obvious rules, like number 1 and number 2, don't bet. And I think another one's like maybe don't have somebody bet for you or something like that. So you just don't know why the most obvious rules are not getting through to these people. And sometimes I think it might be just a bit of, and then, not to harp on it too much with Isaiah Rodgers, but again, you based off the ESPN report, it wasn't like it was a 1 or 2 time thing or a 5 time thing. He did it a lot of times. So you just wonder if you think you have some sort of system set up where you're not going to get caught, you're not going to face any penalties, and then they come back to bite you. So I would just say for people out there who aren't familiar with how the NFL operates and how much of a business it is, because I remember writing the story about the gambling policies. People were freaking out, like, how can they geolocate your phones? That's crazy. They always know where you are. Yes, they have like former probably like FBI people or CIA people walking around keeping tabs on these guys. Like if you think that the NFL doesn't know what's going on, or at least know where you are, I mean, the general our phones, people know where we are. You know what I mean? Companies know where we are all the time. Do you not think that $1 billion corporation would not know where their investments are? Because that's what they are. Quite frankly, we're talking business. The players are investments. You not think they know where their investments are? So I just think that everyone has to, at least if I was in the NFL, I would go the complete EJ Speed route, where it's like, I'm not betting on anything. And the only thing that I would push back on with the NFL, if you're going to allow players to bet on things and just not from the NFL facility, obviously not on NFL games, but like, for example, JJ Stefanski, the team writer, can't bet on anything, period. He can't bet on college. He can't bet on, the Kentucky Derby, as far as I know. You can't bet on anything, the Olympics, nothing. But who would have more information about Alabama football, Tony Brown Jr. or JJ Stefanski? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me why that's the case. Because to me, they should just make it a blanket rule where it's like nobody can bet. But from what I understand, it's like a gentleman's agreement between the players and ownership, because this isn't in the CBA, to sort of let them bet on non-NFL sports. But that just doesn't make sense to me to have it one way for, again, like anyone who gets an NFL check. So, for example, a team custodian to not be able to bet on the NBA Finals versus an actual celebrity who might know a player or a team pretty well, who's, in the NBA Finals. So it just doesn't make sense for me from that standpoint.
Yeah, a lot of gray area. But that being said, probably lean a lot with you, man. I mean, he made some mistakes, and it probably just going to have to suffer with that. And hopefully, maybe he lands on his feet, learns from this. Who knows? Maybe one day he can be the advocate and the guy who takes all of these young kids underneath his wing and says, "Hey, this is what you don't want to do." When you come up in the NFL. So maybe he turns a negative into a real positive. Not sure how that'll play out, and we'll see. More to come. Getting over in kind of the next segment of this, Jim Irsay had some kind of vague comments, and I'm going to say this, James. This is your second season. You've been around Jim enough to know that take everything he says with a grain of salt, right? Like it's not necessary. You can't take that for the exact science. But Shaq Leonard, people get a little bit icky around here, and ever since really the Andrew Luck era. The team hasn't always been the most forthright. I'll say that. And they haven't always informed us exactly what's going on with these injury situations. And with him, I think there's starting to become a little bit of a sentiment in the fan base anyways, is this guy ever going to get to a point where he can return? And does that even make sense, James? I mean, like if you're dealing with nerve damage, which the guy might not even be able to walk one day, if he's having to play with something like this. Is this one of those situations where we might see a Shaq Leonard not have a chance to play again this year? Or is it just way too early to even dive in and even kind of start considering that?
Yeah, I would say it's too early. We just don't know. And quite honestly, all this can be put to bed if he's out there the first day of training camp, he's moving around, he's looking good, and it's like, okay, Shaq's back. And obviously that's a huge story. That's something that's obviously the story I would personally want to write, because I never want anybody to be injured. They tell you as a reporter not to root for any teams, but I always root for like the person to be healthy, do what you love. Yeah. And I think he's invested so much into this game, and considering where it's brought him and where he's come from, how much it means to him. But I just don't know. And it's been that way pretty much since he's had the second back surgery. And this was I believe he got the surgery in January, because he'll be about 6 months removed. I believe over 6 months removed when camp starts on the 25th. And so every step of the way since January, he's making progress. He's progressing. And you just don't know what that means. And quite honestly, it doesn't mean anything to me at all. We'll ask Shane Steichen about it. We'll ask Shaq himself about it. There isn't a timeline. The last time he spoke to us in April, he was saying he hadn't really been running. Obviously, that's a bit concerning, but I was like, okay, well, maybe we'll check back in again a few months later and see how it is. To me, it's not even a fact. The matter of him playing at the start of the season, it's just at any point throughout the season, can he come back healthy and look like the maniac again, or at least as close to it as possible? Yeah. Maybe he isn't, and I know he would hate for me to say this, and maybe he'll use it as fuel, feel free. But even if he isn't 100% the maniac, if he could be 90% of that player, he's still one of the best linebackers in football, right? Absolutely. And so that's what I think I kind of want to see, is like, whether it's week 1, week 8, week 9, after the bye week, whatever, can he at some point throughout this season prove that he can be a great linebacker again, even if he has, quote unquote, lost a step? And if that's the case, I think that gives you more of a clear path towards his future in Indianapolis. And if it isn't, then you have to weigh, what does his future look like? Because he makes so much money that at some point it has to become a factor when he's not available. And I know it hurts him, it pains him, but we just don't know. But looking at it strictly for what it is, let's just say if he comes back and he's not who he was, or he can't get back out there, and if he does get back out there and he's not that dynamic player that you basically paid $100 million for, I think that you have to seriously consider bringing him back next season, because after this season, they have an easier out, the Colts do, as far as if they will want to part ways. And everyone keeps saying, trade him, get rid of him. You can't trade players that don't have much trade value. He doesn't have any trade value right now because his contract is way too big and he hasn't played. Yeah. And pretty much it would have to come down to, I think, you basically cutting him or releasing him. And so that would be one of those things where you look at, okay, if they were to release him next year, it will be a $8 million cap hit. You save $12 million. And then you also save, obviously, the remaining money on his contract, which is, I believe might be about $50 or $60 million left on his deal, on his extension. And so, again, that's something you have to think about. But, yeah, and I see Wyatt Law has a comment like, would Shaq's pride let him play if the nerve issue won't allow him to play at his old level? That's something where, I asked him the last time we spoke to him, like, how much do you lean into or deal with people who question that? And because he's always been the person that can shut people up, but for the better part of a year, he hasn't been able to do that. And you just wonder how much that weighs on him. And if he would, go back out there and just play, but not be who he's always been, one of the best players. You know what I mean? And so that's a factor. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But I would say, we'll monitor it throughout training camp. And I would say this, if he isn't, back out there, full go, no restrictions, at some point throughout training camp, it is a bit concerning to me. It would be much more up on my concern scale if at any point throughout these, weeks leading up to the season, he's just not there. And then obviously as the season goes by, if there's at no point where he's back out there, and if he does go back out there, he's not the same, then you have to think about what you have to do as far as what's best for the team, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I keep saying this. You almost wish he would have just tore his ACL or something like that, because it has a clear timeline, clear recovery plan versus nerves, which can be hit or miss sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something we talked about on here, obviously, was with Shaq, and that was I'm glad Wyatt asked that question, because that was something I was super curious about. Because if he can't play at the level that he is, and like you said, he is known, like he's been able to shut everybody up, from being called the worst pick in the draft when he was drafted to people saying that he shouldn't have won the Defensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, the dude's known for taking screenshots off of Twitter and keeping them for motivation.
Yeah.
What would it be like if he's not? I mean, like you said, if he's out there, he's 90%, he's still a hell of a linebacker. But is that okay with him?
Yeah, that's the hard part. And I think that's the part that you really have to, at least in my perspective, respect the mental aspect of this. Yeah. Because there are some mental hurdles, I'm sure, to one, trying to get back out there and then getting back out there and maybe not feeling like your old self, and if wondering if you're going to get back to that level, because he's kind of been open about that, at least more, I would say the second time around than the first time, where he basically tried to dismiss all of it. He even said he basically hurt himself a bit more by not listening to his body, because he felt like he was letting his team down and kind of forcing himself back out there when he wasn't right. And I think when he went out there last year and he got the pick in his first game back, and everyone was like, man, the Maniac's back, it was kind of twofold, because the ball sort of just came to him. It wasn't like he made some crazy play where he's diving left and snatched it. It's still a big play. You got to catch the ball when it comes to you. But I think that was a little misleading, because he still wasn't, even in that game, he wasn't moving like himself. And I think it really showed when I look back at the film myself. Like, that's not the player that people have told me and I've seen in highlights, move. And so stuff like that, I think, kind of weighs on him. And really, I'm just, not to get too spiritual, but I mean, I'm praying for him. Like, hey man, I hope it works out. I hope you get a chance to get back out there and do what you love, play at the highest level, and let the chips fall where they may in that regard, rather than this game being so cruel and sort of stopping what is still, we'll see how it plays out on the back end. But just being honest, he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory until the back injury. I mean, the guy came in and was first team All-Pro as a rookie. That's insane. Set the franchise tackle record until last year, single season tackle record until last year when Zaire Franklin broke it, because they have 17 games. And I believe his rookie year, Shaq did it in 15 games. And so let's know how much he was flying around and how much he was putting his body on the line. And so, again, just rooting for him to get back out there. And it's not something that's going to be the most pressing issue, because obviously anything Anthony Richardson will grab every headline. But it is something we'll keep monitoring, as well as other situations going on with the team.
Yeah, man. I mean, nobody's rooting harder for Shaq than I am. I mean, I love his spirit. Everything that you love about the game of football, and as a fan, it's almost like you can live vicariously through him on the football field. The way his passion, the way he screams, you want that guy with your helmet with the horseshoe on the side when he's at optimum health. And when he's not, you don't want him on the field because you want him to be healthy and you care about him as a human being and as a person. And everybody knows his story. It's kind of a beautiful story. He came out of nowhere and he's done his thing. And no matter what happens to that guy, I think he's done some great things to raise awareness with mental health, as well as, just being a great football player while he's been on the field for us in his short tenure as a Colt. Moving on down the road, got a question for you. Last year, we headed into training camp. Our offensive line was kind of set in stone, right? We didn't really have this preset competition built in. This year, now I know we have some players who kind of played last year, went through some lumps. That being said, are you a little bit surprised that we haven't went out and got a veteran guard to really just ramp up that competition? Or is this just kind of something that you expected to happen from day one after seeing the draft? I see you smiling, so you got a little something to say about this.
I would say yes and no, because I'll say yes because I'm thinking to myself, man, do you really want to run it back with the same five you ended last year with? And it's not even that you want to run it back with them. I'm like, where's the competition though? Like you said, Zach, where's the oomph in that room to sort of push you to be better? Because right now there isn't really much competition in that room. The only significant upgrade they made to the line was adding Blake Freeland, who is a backup swing tackle. You know what I mean? And I think the position that we're all looking at most closely is right guard. Is Will Fries a starting right guard in the NFL? And is he good enough to be, I want to say given the job, because you have to earn it in some regard, but to not have anybody else come in and at least compete with him for the starting job, do you feel that comfortable about it? And so that's why I'm a little bit lower on the draft haul than most. And I think it was a good draft haul. They still drafted a bunch of team needs, but it was like, this was a bit surprising they didn't address this more. Even if it wasn't as early as I thought. So I thought they could have gone, maybe guard, Osiris Torrance out of Florida in the second round or pick up a third round, fourth round, even in the fifth round. But for them to essentially say, we'll just get Blake Freeland and Jake Witt, who's really, really young. I was thinking like, wow, okay, like, Jake Witt is not somebody who's going to play this year. He's really raw, young player. He wasn't even playing college athletics a few years ago, so you can count him out as far as being part of that equation to start. Like I said, Blake Freeland is a good insurance package to have, but man, I was a bit surprised because it feels like you're going down the same road of trusting guys to step up and sort of come into their own all at the same time. And you just wonder, how much is that experience last year worth versus just adding experience is proven. And then I also say in my no category, why I'm not too surprised, is because of the money. You've already doled out $200 million in extensions combined, that is, for Ryan Kelly, Braden Smith, and Quentin Nelson. And I'm not surprised to say that, Chris Ballard and the team probably weren't that, gung-ho to go out and pay a guy like Dalton Risner, for example, a pretty good salary to stabilize the offensive line. But to me, they are putting a lot of trust in Tony Sparano Jr. I'm like, this man must be the offensive line whisperer, the offensive line guru, because he is the most significant upgrade they made to the offensive line. And so you just wonder how much can he galvanize that group and, to me, get them back to being at least respectable. Because I don't think they're going to be one of those situations where it's like they go from last to first. They're going to go from being one of the worst offensive lines last to one of the best in the league. But to me, can they just be average? You're not asking them that as a coaching staff, hey, be average. But from a realistic standpoint, if you're not going to change the personnel, can you at least beat, or surpass what you did last year and protect your most prized possession, which is the rookie quarterback? And to me, if they can go out there and be a middle-of-the-pack offensive line, that's probably good enough to at least evaluate what you have with Anthony Richardson and not have him running for his life every single play, because I believe the Colts last year gave up the second most sacks, or at least they were top 5 in sacks given up, and you just can't have that happen again. And they're taking a really big gamble on Tony Soprano Jr. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you better be right, because so much is riding on this besides just bragging rights and fans saying, hey, you should have did this, because it's harder to even evaluate, the quarterback if he, one, is going through so many changes. He hasn't played a lot of games. He hasn't had a lot of snaps as far as, just getting reps in games. And are you going to just throw him in the fire and not protect them? So I'm very curious to see how it all looks. And we won't know, out of all the groups you can evaluate in training camp, you just don't know about any offensive line or defensive line. You can kind of calculate the pressure, but it's just not the same because you can't hit anybody. So until we get to the season, we don't know. And I'm like, man, if you get to the season and you find out, it's too late by that point. So I'm very curious to see that. I know you're groaning, but man, it's tough. I see it from both sides, but man, Tony Soprano Jr., man, that guy might be the most valuable coach on the staff outside of the ones dealing with the quarterback, obviously, is the guy who's going to protect him.
Yeah, man. Real quick, Stephen, before you kind of fill your question in here, want to take a quick second to thank Dylan, Truitt, Nomad, Wyatt as always, Matt Stansberry hopping in here, Colton as always. Guys, you've been so good to us throughout the whole. This is, I guess, our third season, right, Stephen? We're getting ready to do this and kick this thing off, and you guys have been so good to us here on the YouTube channel, and you've joined this family. Adam as well just popped in here. Super cool to see you guys. And if you haven't had a chance, like, rate, review, share, and subscribe. And also, man, hey, if you haven't had a chance to come over on Threads, we dipped our toes in the water a little bit.
I'm looking at James too.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I am like, I have so much social media, I feel like, as it is, and the day where they like implemented that weird like tweet limit, can't read anything, it was honestly probably like one of the best days I've had in a while, where I just wasn't glued to my phone. It helped because it's the off season, you don't need to be on your phone that much. But my screen time has kind of gone down since some of these shenanigans with Twitter. And I'm like, man, how much do I want to just be, throwing myself back into the deep end with another social media site? So until I open the Twitter app and it just doesn't work, then I will go like towards Threads. But until then, it's like, I know people complain about it. I know it's been difficult. You lost the blue check, whatever goes on. There's always something going on with the app. But until it just completely stops working, I feel like I'm just going to be a Twitter guy until it changes. So
what's funny, James, is I said something. I was on because Zach Kiefer and all them, they're on there. And I was like, where's James? And all I got back from Zach was peer pressure. That's all he said. He's like, peer pressure.
I guess I didn't succumb to it much as a kid or a teenager. Maybe I'm just hard-headed and the last of the party. But I'm like, man, I don't want to create this thing. And then it's like, oh, Twitter's back up and running and it's fine. And then part of me is like, I would literally just copy and paste whatever I did from Twitter over to Threads. And so I'm like, man, would I plagiarize myself? Is that a thing? Like, what's going on here? So we'll see. But I think that Twitter, as you can see with the Anthony Richardson video, has treated me well, I guess, as far as traffic and comments and community and things like that.
So I've got a question for you. So last year, you went through, you got to see kind of how Frank ran off-season training camp. I know we're not to training camp, obviously, yet. What's the difference you've seen so far in the offseason, right? Like, obviously, like I said, we're not to training camp yet, but how Coach Steichen, how Shane has handled the offseason, how's the mini camp? How is it different? How's the vibe different? How does he coach? I'm just curious to see like the biggest differences between the two.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit harder to gauge right now because you're not in the thick of training camp. You're not out there in that summer heat. And to those who might have been concerned, I did buy my bucket hat. I got it. I'm good to go. Got the sunscreen. I'm ready. I'm ready this year. I'm a veteran now. But I think with Shane Steichen, it's just not as much small talk, at least from the media perspective. He's all business. With Frank, there might be a little bit of a tangent he might go on or something like that, or he'll give maybe a wordier answer about a player or something like that. But with Shane, it is literally just straightforward. And I think that he might have, like, we calculate all the minutes that he spends answering us, questions from the media. He might be like top 5 lowest at the end of the season when it comes to just running time in front of the media, because he just doesn't, give too much in that regard. So I'm curious to see how it goes from the player's perspective. They said that he's very, very, very detail oriented, which every coach claims to be, every coach is. But with him, there's, I think, a bit of a sternness there and sort of this is how it's going to be. I remember asking him, like, hey, what is it going to take to show Anthony Richardson, what it is to be a quarterback in the NFL? And he's like, well, we're going to, be on this stuff every day. I'm going to show him this is the standard. And it's kind of like, if you're not at that standard, you're not going to play sort of way. So that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from him. And so we'll understand a little bit more when we get into training camp. I know the schedule is different this year. Last year, they had more of the midday sort of thing going. They were trying to line it up with like how the games would be, body clock and stuff like that. Your body, ideally on a game day, your body will be kind of going through this routine. So we'll do it this way. So I remember last year, training camp and all that stuff will kind of start maybe like 11:30 or 12 or something like that and be done, at 2 or 3. This year, I believe a lot of the practice started in the morning, like 10:30, and they're getting going. And outside of the joint practices that are in the evening, they're going to be up and at it. And so I'm curious to see how that goes. And then the biggest change we've seen, and I'm very curious to see how it benefits the team, is having the 2 joint practices, which to my knowledge, which is Chap's knowledge, because Mike Chappell, Fox 59, knows all this stuff a lot better than me. He's saying, he was like, yeah, this is the first time they've had, 2 joint practices in their existence. And Shane Steichen said it's a Philly thing that he got from them, and he's done it, pretty much every year he was there with them, and they've done it a lot. And so they're having the 2 joint practices. And I just wonder, one, obviously, what does that mean as far as reps for Anthony Richardson, getting him more game type reps, but then 2, just reps for everybody to be able to play sort of more real football before you get to that real stage. And again, it gives you a more chance to be detailed in what you do, which is Shane Steichen's whole thing. With the joint practices, you can create scenarios, and I would argue that they're probably a little bit more valuable than the preseason games themselves, because you can't stop preseason game and say, hey, we're going red zone drills now. But you can do that with the Bears and with the Eagles. And the one thing that I'm going to really be focusing on is what things can Anthony Richardson potentially learn from looking at the other guy? Because I think that Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts, I know I'm on a tangent, I'm kind of ranting a little bit, but just stick with me. They're both guys who have similar skill sets with the dual threat capability, the big arms, and the dynamic running ability. But they're like different chapters of their journey. Like Jalen Hurts is the superstar. Justin Fields is the guy who they seem to have hitched their wagon to. He's shown promise, but it's like, can he take that extra step this year now that he has a number 1 receiver, now that he has a better offensive line to push for more, potentially make a playoff appearance? And then you have Anthony Richardson, who's coming in as a rookie, who has all the talent in the world. You just wonder if he can put it all together. And I'm just curious to know if he's going to not, talk to these guys, straight to their face, but just pick up on whatever he can to maybe follow in the same footsteps of making progress, learning from their mistakes, and pushing towards being a top guy in the league, which will be the Colts' dream. Because if you look up in 2 or 3 years and he's had a similar trajectory as Jalen Hurts, I think all of us sitting here will be like, okay, yeah, that's for real. And that's something that you can build around.
Absolutely, man. Hey, Wyatt, thank you for the comment. James, I'm sure he appreciated it as well. Hey,
usually
Wyatt. Hey, and Wyatt, you've always been a great listener, and you've always been tuning in with us. Keep rocking with us, and we will have James on here as the season goes along. As we're kind of wrapping up, just curious your thoughts on, is there a group, and obviously this is a job, this is your day-to-day, this is what you do, but is there a group on this football team that you're most excited about being down there in the trenches, seeing them live and in person, that you're thinking to yourself, you know what, this is kind of an interesting group of young men right here. Anything, I'm just curious if there's any player or groups that you would be interested in as you're heading down.
I think besides the quarterback position, because I'm very curious to see how Anthony Richardson handles the spotlight, because right now they've kind of kept him pretty much coddled, even with the media sessions. Like, he wasn't talking to us as often as you would expect, for example, a starting quarterback, franchise quarterback, to talk to you throughout the offseason. They haven't named a starter, obviously, so they're kind of keeping him insulated. But I'm curious to see, okay, how do you handle it when you throw in front of the Indianapolis public for the first time, and every throw is scrutinized. The great throws are going to be, oh, he's the greatest quarterback ever. The bad ones, oh, he's the worst quarterback ever. How do you deal with that and that first taste of that? When you're not, playing pickup basketball, people love you all the time, because there's going to be a lot of criticism that comes with this position. So besides from that, I'm very curious to get in the trenches and see the cornerback room and just to see who steps up. And I'm a guy who always loves a nice comeback story. So with Kenny Moore, could this be a year where you bounce back and you're like, hey, I'm still Pro Bowl Kenny. I want to be here. Even talking to him this offseason, I had a chance to talk to him at the Indianapolis Children's Museum for an event. And he was talking about how hard it was to sort of wonder about his future and to be back here again, not traded, a chance to prove himself. Will he have a bounce back year? And also, can a guy like Julius Brents, step up and be a day one guy, the hometown hero? Is that something that you can kind of latch onto? And then also the dark horse candidates for starting. Darius Rush, what does it mean for him that Isaiah Rodgers isn't here? Is that an opportunity for him to get up, and become a starter in his first year? Again, this is a guy who was a third or fourth round projection, fell to the fifth round, was devastated, was hurt by it. I remember talking to him at training camp, or actually it was a rookie mini camp, and he was saying, that day, I believe it was that first day pass, or the second day, I'm sorry, he said the TV goes off, and I'm looking at the TV, just looking at it. I turn the TV off and I'm staring at the screen. I'm still here, haven't been picked, and how much that has fueled him, and can that be something that pushes him? And then my guy Dallas Flowers, who is the most confident person alive. He is really, really confident. And to his credit, he talked like that, the way he is now this offseason, about seizing the opportunity, potentially being a starter, taking advantage of the moment. He talked the same way last year when he was an undrafted guy, played at 4, as he put it, no-name schools people didn't know about. And it seemed like every time he got an opportunity last year to make a play, he did. I remember his first time getting in on special teams, I believe, against Denver, that god-awful Thursday night game. He actually forced a fumble, like right before halftime on a kickoff. It was like a play that no one will forget. But I remember thinking to myself, man, like, that's just like something that you do when you're trying to just dig in and get a shot or show something to a coach about, hey, I know we didn't have the greatest game, but look, I forced his fumble, and I'm really a cornerback. I'm a kickoff guy, but I'll play coverage. I'll be a gunner, and I'll get down there and make a play. And so that's the group that intrigues me the most, because they have so many interesting stories and so many ways it could go, where you just wonder, okay, who's going to rise to the top? And even then, there could still be some decent depth at that position. Granted, young, where you just wonder, okay, throughout the season, could there be more changes given this guy might step up, or, is that the right answer? I don't know. So I'm very excited for that, because this is our first taste of it, right? It seems like we're crazy. Yeah. When the season ends, we want to exhale. Okay, that's one's behind you. But I feel like you give me like a week, and then I'm like, all right, when's the next one? And so we're finally getting back into that. Yeah. And so I feel like once I got out in Westfield and I feel that sun on my skin, and, we're charting Anthony Richardson's 7-on-7 passes and 11-on-11 passes, all the nerd stuff that we do. And I'm thinking to myself, this will not matter in like 6 weeks, but it matters right now. And it's the most important thing ever. For that, because that's all you want out of this, man. And like I always tell you guys, it's a privilege to be out there anyway. And so to be in that space, I'm just excited for it. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe you all can attest to it or maybe share your own thoughts, but how does it feel to maybe have just a direction and an identity this time around? Last year, you obviously had high hopes with Matt Ryan, but this year it feels like where the team is headed in general. Does that feel better for you all, just knowing you have a franchise guy, you got a young quarterback, got a new coach, and everything, at least on paper, looks like it's going to be a little more stable than it was last year?
Yeah, I'll go first, and then Steven, you can finish up. Yeah, for me, 100%. I think the expectations were set so high going into last year too. I think that was one of the things for me. But it's refreshing, because I was just a great question you asked, because I was just talking to my buddy the other day on the phone, and I said, I really won't judge this season by wins and losses. Like, I think there can be some optimistic things happen during this season. Here in Indy, we're huge Pacers fans. They're kind of on that same trajectory, but they're at the beginning of that. The Pacers are 1 year advanced in that process. But But that's kind of what they're doing. And they haven't really set any unreasonable expectations. Like, hey, we're ready to, we think we could take the bull by the horns or anything. They're just going to see how it goes. They haven't given the job to Anthony Richardson, although as a fan, selfishly, and I just think the only way you get better is to play. Even if you struggle, I think that's the way to go for a young guy. Just the mental part of the game is so valuable. But yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time. I feel more optimistic about the future, and I feel like that we've got, kind of double back on the Shane Steichen comment a second ago. He's not going to say a lot, but isn't that kind of nice every once in a while in sports where you don't get the guy you feel like he's just selling you something, every single time he gets on the podium. He's just giving you what he is. He really just wants to coach football, and he really just wants to win football games and get better. And damn it, I appreciate that, man, because I really just want to win football games, and I'm tired of losing. So,
yeah. I mean, if you have a coach, a player, whatever, who doesn't talk that much, on one hand, as a media member, you're like, oh, man, I wish he would have given me a little bit more to work with. But on the other hand, when I'm transcribing these guys and what they say, and you have to type out every single word just to make sure you don't miss something, when he's up there and it's like 3 minutes, I'm like, great. It's a lot easier to go through his transcription than it is to go through Jim Irsay's, where it's just on and on and on. You're like, oh, man, I'm taking so much time writing this stuff up. So, yeah, I don't mind it at all. And honestly, either style works, like you said, if you win games. But Stephen, from your perspective, man, what is it like to just know that they picked someone finally at quarterback? You got that down. You got a new coach. And I would imagine, even a guy like Jelani Woods, there's just buzz around certain positions and certain players where you feel like there's glimpses of what this could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm the same. It's I feel – so I had to talk myself. I was not a fan of the Matt Ryan trade last year. I kind of had to talk myself into it and hey, it could be good. Hey, maybe they solved it for a few years. You kick the can down the road. And I mean, and last season, and firsthand, it was so bad and it was so hard to watch and to reset. I'm the same with Zach. I'm not people ask me, hey, what's your prediction wins losses? And I'm very rarely, I float around 6, and I'm okay with that because my caveat is always if you win, 5 or 6 games or you get a higher pick, but Anthony Richardson looks good and progresses. And I loved the example. I didn't even think about that. It was such a great example of it's 3 tiers. There's Anthony Richardson, the rookie. You want him to take a step to look like Justin Fields, and then Justin Fields wants to take the step to look like Jalen. It's a great progression to as an example. I'm hopeful. I mean, whether they win a ton of games or they don't, I'm really hopeful on, and then even down to Coach Steichen, I do like the fact that he's focused. Now here in Tennessee, the joke here would be, at UT they had Jeremy Pruitt, who everyone loved the fact that he was all ball, right? Yeah. But he couldn't win. And Josh Heupel's all ball, but he wins. And that's kind of that combo you want. It's okay to not give a lot to the media and to give it to you guys and to you, as long as you're, progressing. If they're winning 3 games a year and he doesn't give you snippets, it's going to get testy.
Yeah. You could look at it, Bill Belichick, Andy Reid. They're so different, but they win. And so each one of them is beloved, where they are when they were winning, because winning is all that really gets accounted for in this league. It sounds kind of rude sometimes, but at the end of the day, winning will be what determines Anthony Richardson's future, what determines Shane Steichen's future, what determines Chris Ballard's future. The only one who is secure in all of this, no matter what happens, sun up, sun down, win, loss, whatever, is the owner, Jim Irsay. That's it. So I do think that you all should be hopeful about the season. I will say this too, in regards to Anthony Richardson potentially starting, to me, it comes down to, can he just close the gap, a decent amount as far as him and Gardner Minshew? Because I don't think that he's going to be a better quarterback than Gardner Minshew by week 1 of the season. I think that's just too steep of a climb to make in one offseason, not having played any NFL games. But to me, the gap just can't be so wide where it's obvious that you're throwing a guy out there who isn't ready and who obviously hasn't, quote unquote, earned that right now. If Anthony Richardson is putting in the work and you feel like, okay, he isn't as good as this guy, but we're not throwing him out there. He's not a deer in headlights. He knows what he's doing. He knows the protections. Maybe the mechanics isn't exactly where it needs to be. Well, he'll get better with more reps. That to me is the key versus, people saying, oh, he's going to be better than him. Like, no, let's not forget.
Yeah.
Gardner Minshew threw 21 touchdowns against 6 interceptions as a rookie. Yeah. If Anthony Richardson does that, there will be fans asking to build the statue. Yeah. So I'm just saying, temper expectations.
Yeah.
There's going to be some growing pains. But to me, it comes down to just making sure the gap in between those two players isn't the ocean. If it's not the ocean, play the young guy. Because, again, it wasn't like Gardner Minshew was signed to a 3-year deal anyway. It's a 1-year deal. How much do you want to play a guy who, in all likelihood, may not be back next year anyway? Now, he's here to be, a good option at quarterback. He's here to also mentor Anthony Richardson. That's not his sole job. He wants to compete with him. I think that in and of itself will help him get better as a quarterback, as a young quarterback. But at the end of the day, to me, it's all about progress and seeing what you got out of Anthony Richardson. Like you all said, there's going to be some highs, I'm sure, and some lows. But if you get to, week 18, you're like, hey, we only got 5 or 6 wins, but gosh darn it, we got our guy. It's all worth it, because to me, all it takes is getting that guy, and then you're able to really build a team around that guy, but hopefully become a winner. And I think that you've seen that in certain scenarios throughout the league, because who were the Bengals before they got Joe Burrow? Who were the Bills before they got Josh Allen? When it clicks, everything usually is able to line up better. And the trickle-down effect, not to get too much into the weeds, is guys want to come play with you. If Anthony Richardson balls out and by his 3rd or 4th year, he's a guy, worrying about who you're going to bring in free agency becomes a lot easier on both sides of the ball, because they feel like that guy can get me to the playoffs and potentially the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, and let's be honest, he's either going to be the reason Chris Ballard loses his job or keeps his job for a very long time, right? If he doesn't play well.
I think he's safe for now and probably for the next year or two. But at some point, you have to be able to show, if you're Chris Ballard, this is what my legacy has been defined by as a GM here. Right now, it doesn't look too pretty. You were given, I believe, a little bit of a longer leash because of the Anthony Richardson pick. And no one, I don't think, should lose their job after 1 season. However, if it gets to year 2, year 3, you're not seeing the progress you want to see, yes, you do have to reevaluate everything at that point, which it starts at the top, which in this case would be Chris Ballard.
Yeah, it's funny because I was gonna ask one more question, but you totally answered it already. I was curious what your thoughts were and what you not necessarily needed to see, but let's do this, because I want to ask James and I want to ask Zach. Week 1, coin flip. Who's running out of the tunnel as QB1 for the Colts? Who do you think? Not reporting, no sources, none of that.
I'll
James.
Let Zach go first.
I'm gonna go first because I'm curious James's answer. Short answer: Anthony Richardson will come out week 1. That's just my opinion. I think the owner wants that. I think the GM would love that, and I think the head coach would love that. But that being said, it's ultimately going to be Shane Steichen's decision. But I expect Anthony Richardson to come out of that tunnel week 1. That's just my feelings.
I will second that. I think it's Anthony Richardson. I think that you've invested so much into him already. You don't draft a guy 4th overall to not start him. But I'll cushion it by saying if he isn't starting by week 1, it's not a failure. He is a very young and raw prospect. I mean, he hasn't started back-to-back seasons at quarterback since he was in high school. And so that's something that he has to hopefully push to do this season. But if I had to bet on it, I would say Anthony Richardson, just because of what they've invested, what he means to the team, what he means for their future. And again, this is with knowing how much of a student of the game he is, how much he cares about it. He seems by all accounts to be a very, very hard worker. And I just can't, in my mind, picture that hard work not paying off at some point to where you feel more comfortable putting him out there. And then again, listening to the GM, the coach, obviously the owner, it sounds like to get better, you have to play. And they all sound like they want to play him. To me, it just, again, you can't disrespect your team by throwing him out there if he's just completely unready. But if he's showing progress, showing signs of maturity, both as a leader on the field, but in, knowledge of the playbook, things like that, more consistency with his throwing mechanics, put him out there And when you do put him out there, know that that's a decision that you have to stick with. Like, I don't think that you should be throwing it out there and there should be some doubt to why you're doing it, because it can't be one of those things where you put him out there, then you take him out and put Gardner Minshew in because he isn't ready yet. Like, no, that would be a disaster from a football perspective and also from a PR perspective, because I feel like we would be sharks in the water at that point. Like, what are you doing? Put him out there when you're ready. And if you feel like that's week one and you're ready for the roller coaster that it will be, because it will be very up and down, I'm all for it. And then selfishly as a writer, you want to cover the most athletic quarterback ever. Like, I've seen him play basketball. Now I want to see him play football.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, man. Couldn't have said it better. James, we're getting ready to hop off here, but before we do, man, just want to congratulate you, the lead writer at The Athletic. You're doing such a great job. And honestly, when I read that, man, I've just loved your story. I've always followed along, and not to get too sentimental, but I looked over and told my wife, I said, man, I'd love for our son to turn out like James Boyd, man. That's God honest truth, man. I mean, really, it's cool. You know, all about believing in your dream and just following your dreams, and then having two people to support you, and probably way more than two people to support you, and be unreasonable, man. I mean, I think that's the motto we have in this household, and that's pretty cool. So congratulations on that. And a question I have to ask before we end this, will there be a podcast?
Yes. I actually just answered that tweet before I hopped on this podcast. Yes. Okay. My editor, Jim Aiello, he will join me. The name might be familiar to some out there because he used to cover the Colts for Indy Star. So he's a former beat writer himself, so he knows he's now to the team. Excited to get it going. I did tweet this out. I'm actually on vacation right now. Technically, I've been doing some Indiana Fever stuff on my own. Stay tuned on that. I'm working on the Leah Boston feature that I feel like I've put my, heart and soul into, just tracking down, trying to get some things done. Because as we talk about the progress in this city from the Colts perspective, the Pacers, the Fever, and her in particular have some special things going on their side of things. I think she deserves that honor, that right, that spotlight. And so, as far as the podcast goes, though, there's going to be a lot more coming for sure. And I'll let everyone know here and right now, there's going to be an episode before training camps begin. And then obviously when training camp gets in the thick of things, we'll be there weekly talking about what I see, what I'm hearing. And I'm looking forward to that, because as much as I love being on everybody else's podcast, I know I want to be on my own as well. But as far as you all go, feel free to hit me up anytime. We'll make it work, because I do like having the other thoughts out there, because it's not just me. Like, I never want to think that I know everything about the team, because there are times where you all will, put a podcast out there and I listen. I'm like, okay, that is a good point that Steven and Zach made. Okay, that's a really good point. Maybe I'll go back and ask a question about it to a player. So there's always times I feel like I'm stealing from others. Maybe that's not how I should phrase it, but I think that we're all in this together, and I think it's fun when you have more people in this space. And so I'm excited to continue going. And I'll tell your son as well, dream big, man, because I promise you, I could not see any of this when I was, in high school and college, just grinding. Even my early years in this profession, when I was doing high school sports, it is still as fun as it was when I first started. And the level doesn't really matter. It's just, can you get in this space, have fun with it, enjoy what you do? And I honestly do. And it's cool to kind of share that love with others. And I'm all about positivity, man. Like, I think if you believe in yourself, you work hard, good things happen. And so maybe that'll be a motto for the Colts. If you believe in yourself, you work hard. Maybe we look up in a few months and come January and we're like, man, that season, it might have been great on paper, but we got something here. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Steven, my man, as you always do, send us out.
Yes. Well, I was going to say too, I'll speak for Zach on this. Like, we feel very blessed that you continue to come on too. Like, from the very beginning, because we always joke, like, when we start and we're able to build relationships like Zach has built with, like we've built with you, we feel very blessed. Like, we know that Zach can send you a message, and if you got time, you're like, yeah, man, I'm coming. And that's an amazing thing for us, especially as you just continue to just just shoot through the ceiling, man. And know that we're super proud too. I know there's a lot of people who are proud of you, but we're super proud too. And we're going to be at training camp too. So we're picking our days. So we'll see you there one of those days. I'm coming up from Tennessee. Zach has a couch for me, and I'm coming up there to come to at least one practice.
Yeah.
Because we got ourselves credentialed again this year. So we're pretty excited. But I'll say this as we end this thing, we always end it the same way. I love you. I know Zach loves you. I know James loves you. Dream big. We're out.